everyone. Welcome to our RBT ethics training over the RBT ethical code. Here, before we start our training, I wanted to give you a quick idea of how long I plan for the training. I'm planning on 1 hour for the duration of our training today. This is going to include a baseline knowledge check, a pre-test at the very beginning of our module here. That'll take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes for you to complete. If you need more time, no worries, just let me know. But after we get through that baseline knowledge check, we're going to go ahead and start with our training objectives, get into our introduction, and then go section by section through our targeted ethical codes that we'll be reviewing through our presentation today. After we get through the meat of our information, we've got a couple of different ethical scenarios that I would love for us to have a group discussion about, and just so we can delve a little bit deeper into those ethical codes that we have today. And then after that, we'll go through our conclusions and takeaways, just a quick little blurb about why the ethical code is important. And then after that, we will begin our group activity where we will all have a different ethical scenario and have the opportunity to create a little presentation of about 2 to 5 minutes about your scenario and discuss why the codes that you've chosen for that scenario are important. After we finish our discussion, our group activity will have a brief discussion here at the end of the training, just to answer any additional follow-up questions, and then we will end our training with a post-training test. Again, this is just to see if the training is sticking, and we're just testing for knowledge retention. No biggie. After that, we do have an end of training survey that we do want you guys to fill out just so we can improve our training practices here on the training team. But with that being said, I would give the group about 5 to 10 minutes for them to complete their training activity. Once everybody has their training activity and all of their scores are recorded and attendance is taken, I would go ahead and start with the introduction to ethics for RBTs. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we've got a few key points here, including the definition and importance of ethics in behavior analysis, the role of the RBT in the ethical service delivery, and that relationship between RBTs supervising BCBAs, BCABAs, clients, and our stakeholders. Ethics in ABA is essential for protecting the dignity, rights, and well-being of clients while promoting professional conduct. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Definition and importance of ethics in behavior analysis. So the definition is, in the context of ABA, ethics refers to systematic application of moral principles that govern professional conduct, decision-making, and the treatment of our clients. These principles are going to help practitioners navigate complex situations and promote actions that are right, fair, and in the best interest of those we serve. So essentially what this is saying is that the ethical code for RBTs provides a guideline for everybody that practices ABA services to follow. We all have different thresholds and different experiences that create our moral and ethical codes within ourselves. So this code just provides everybody the same amount of guidance in terms of navigating difficult situations. Just ensures that we're all behaving ethically in the same way. Ethical practice is vital to ensure the protection of our clients, the credibility of behavior analysis as a science, and the safety and effectiveness of those services. Because behavior analysts work with vulnerable individuals, we as well work with vulnerable individuals. We are held to a high ethical standard to avoid harm and promote those meaningful outcomes. ABA, from the very beginning, historically, ABA is not very favorable. A lot of people hear false claims about ABA, which makes it very difficult for people to support it. But when we behave professionally and with integrity, we further support ABA as a science, essentially. Moving down here to the role of the RBT in ethical service delivery. So RBTs are credentialed professionals who are going to implement ABA services under supervision. The ethical responsibilities are going to be defined in the RBT ethics code. We do have a version of the RBT ethics code for you to download within our training today. All right, so our responsibilities as RBTs are implementing the BCBA's treatment plan with integrity and consistency, making sure that we're accurately collecting and reporting data, making sure we're not falsifying any data for our own personal convenience, protecting client confidentiality and dignity at all times, just making sure that client-sensitive information such as data sheets or even their central reach page on your phone or on your tablet is just closed and maintained privately at all times. And then also maintaining boundaries with clients and families. We'll talk about different multiple relationship ethical codes later on in our presentation. And then seeking that guidance from supervisor when those ethical dilemmas or your scope of practice concerns arise. So essentially just understanding who your chain of command is when you are faced with an ethical dilemma. And if you're not sure who that is, go ahead and reach out to me post-training and we can start figuring that out for you, okay? All right, so according to the BACB, RBTs must work within their designated scope, follow supervision requirements, and avoid making independent clinical decisions. So again, we are not independent practitioners. We can only make decisions with the BCBA supervision. All right. Moving on to relationship between RBTs, BCBAs, BCABAs, clients, basically all of the relationships that we come into contact with within our behavior analytic services. First is the RBT and supervising BCBA or BCABA. So us as RBTs, we have to follow the clinical direction of a qualified supervisor. We cannot make independent decisions on our own. We do not have the schooling or the training to make those decisions for treatment. Supervisors hold legal and ethical responsibilities for the client's treatment plan and the RBT's implementation. So just like us as RBTs, BCBAs have their own ethical code that they have to subscribe to and uphold in order to maintain the integrity of their behavior analytic services. RBTs are required to receive ongoing supervision. We all are very aware at this point that we have to receive a minimum of 5% of our total worked hours per month in order to maintain our credentialing. So, and if you are not meeting that 5%, please reach out and we can get something figured out. We should also be tracking those in the event of an audit. So if you're not tracking those hours, please let me know and I can get you a company RBT hour tracker. RBT and client relationship. So us as RBTs, we are expected to treat all of our clients with respect, cultural sensitivity, and compassion. Ethical codes prohibit dual relationships, discrimination of any form, and any form of exploitation. So we should always communicate respect and cultural sensitivity. This could look like taking your shoes off before walking into a house, avoiding eye contact. For some cultures, it may be seen as rude or standoffish, or even avoiding like handshakes or formal greetings that we see as polite. For other cultures, it may be seen as impolite. And then with discrimination and compassion, we should make sure that we're meeting all genders, all races, all ethnicities with compassion and with a lack of discrimination. We should not exploit them because they're already a vulnerable population. All right, and the client's goals and well-being are always the highest priority. We have to maintain respect for our clients' overall quality of life, regardless of what we have going on in our lives. We are there to support the client and their independence and their progress. And then finally, this last relationship here is RBT and stakeholders. This includes families, teachers, and caregivers. RBTs are going to interact with stakeholders, but we always must communicate professionally and within our role, meaning that we are not allowed to consult or advise on interventions within treatment. Even if we are explicitly asked by a caregiver, it's always just best to refer back to the BCBA. We should not promise results, discuss diagnoses, or give clinical advice. So especially promising those results, if you say something along the lines of, I've done this intervention several other times with other clients and it's been very successful in decreasing yelling, and the intervention doesn't work for this client, then you are responsible for making those false claims and creating that false hope, and essentially just giving the client, false hope overall. All right, remember RBTs do represent the BCBA and the agency, and we are always viewed as professionals in the eyes of the clients and the family. So regardless of your standing within behavior analytic services, we are still viewed as a professional, and we should always be aware of some level of power dynamic there. All right, moving on to the overview of our RBT ethics code here. So a couple of key codes to remember. We're not going to go over all of the codes in the RBT ethical code because that would be a 3-hour training, but we do have the RBT ethical code posted at the bottom, so go ahead and scroll to that. I'll give them about 2 minutes to look through that before moving on. All right, so let's talk about some key codes. This first section here is RBT responsibilities to their clients. This includes supporting clients' best interests, maintaining client dignity and privacy, and avoiding those dual relationships and conflict of interest. Next section here, we've got competence and integrity. We're going to ensure that we're maintaining competence through ongoing training, such as trainings like this one, and then accurate documentation and truthful reporting. Again, making sure we're not falsifying that data, even not making sure that we're not falsifying information on things like incident reports or ABC data and things like that. All right, next little section here is the supervision requirement. So again, we as RBTs, we have to work under a qualified supervisor, we have to follow supervisory instructions, and we have to seek guidance when we are faced with ethical uncertainties or even programming questions. We are not at the liberty to make those independent programming decisions. Communication and documentation is next, number 4. This just means objective and clear communication, avoiding that jargon, making sure that documentation is timely, and making sure that that documentation is also secured and data is privately secured for a minimum of 7 years. Lastly, here we have reporting and responding to ethical concerns. This is just identifying and reporting violations. There's quite a few codes that are associated with this because this is one of the main things that ensures that we as RBTs in behavior analytics services maintain ethical practices. And then we have self-reporting ethical concerns within yourself. This might include not meeting supervision requirements for any given month. So in the event that you do not meet your supervision requirements, you do have to report that to the BACB within 30 days. You also do have to report that to our company. All right, let's go into a little bit more in depth with these, starting in section 1. So general responsibilities, supporting clients' best interests. So RBTs must always act in a way that promotes the health and safety and well-being of clients. This is going to include making sure we're using evidence-based ABA interventions. We are not allowed to use any other scientific practice while we are implementing ABA services. Avoiding actions that could cause physical or emotional harm. So this could include maybe using safety care procedures inappropriately or using safety care procedures before you are certified, or it could also mean using intimidation tactics to essentially gain compliance for a target. Last one here, we have prioritizing client goals over our personal convenience. So regardless of how we are feeling, we should always ensure that we are showing up to session, giving our all, and making sure that we are running programming effectively, efficiently, and with fidelity. Moving on here, we have supporting the client's dignity. So this code is going to emphasize respect for the client as an overall person. We must treat clients with kindness, cultural sensitivity, and professionalism, as previously mentioned. This is going to include, though, using appropriate language. So using more adult-based language with a client who's 15 versus using more childlike language. Also honoring space, so making sure that we're providing personal space or giving that client an opportunity to have a moment to themselves. And then advocating for the client's voice to be heard. So this could even mean carrying around an AAC device, a PECS book, just making sure that they have the opportunity for communication. All right, moving on to our next code here, maintaining competence. So RBTs must only practice within their scope and skill level. We are required to seek ongoing training and supervision to remain effective and current in our knowledge. So our example here we have, RBT should not attempt to create a BIP. This is outside of our role and requires the BCBA. Again, this is also going to include advising on interventions, advising caregivers on procedures. Regardless of your level of understanding of the procedure, it's still inappropriate for you to advise on that. Moving on to our next code here. We have code 101, being truthful and accurate. So this is all communication, documentation, and data must be honest and clear. Misreporting data, exaggerating skills, or falsifying session notes is unethical behavior, and this could lead to disciplinary action from the BACB and from your professional organization. So for our example here, we have that writing the client mastered a skill that they haven't just to meet the deadline is a violation of this code. Again, we're prioritizing progress for our clients and ensuring that we are being truthful and accurate. When we falsify data and mislead based off of our information, this could prevent the client from making meaningful progress and strides within their programming. All right, moving on here. Moving on to communicating effectively. Making sure that our communication is clear, respectful, and professional, whether it's written or spoken, and we should avoid using jargon with our families and ensure that we explain procedures appropriately. I've heard it called layman's terms, basically explaining procedures and interventions in a way that makes sense to the family. Jargon is the technical term used by professionals for technical language, for ABA language. So for example, we've got differential reinforcement. I've heard like behavioral contract can be kind of a jarring thing to hear, or extinction or an extinction burst. Those things are very difficult to understand if you don't have an ABA background. So it's best for us to explain things in a much more understandable way for somebody that's never been involved in ABA. We should also secure documentation and maintain data privacy. So we as RBTs, we're responsible for protecting that data. Doesn't matter if it's in paper or digital form, we should make sure that we're securing our platform. So this includes closing your browsers, keeping your devices that you take data on locked down with a passcode, making sure that we're locking away any permanent product data. So that includes PECS data, any tracing data, basically any kind of physical data needs to be locked away. And then making sure we're not discussing private information in an open area. So for example, here we have explaining a visual schedule to a parent in simple terms rather than technical ABA language. That's a great example of a use of jargon, which is something that we should avoid. However, when we're discussing private information in open areas, for example, if you use enough identifying information, people who are unfamiliar with the client can make enough inferences based off of the information that you've provided, and they can assume who that client is, which then breaks confidentiality. All right, last little section here, avoiding dual relationships and conflicts of interest. So we as RBTs have to avoid those relationships because these could blur professional boundaries. A dual relationship is going to exist when an RBT has both a professional and a personal role with the same person. So we've got a couple of examples here, like accepting a gift, babysitting for a client's family, or becoming friends on social media. This could compromise objectivity. This also includes soliciting business services. So if you, an RBT, are providing behavior analytic services every day, but then you also solicit services for that client's parent's business, this is still the same thing as a dual relationship, because then it crosses into a personal relationship with the family. And then just a little note here, ABT, they do discourage repeated acceptance of gifts of $10. We do have the right to accept gifts that are $10 or less, but if it's a repeated thing, we definitely should be using discretion. There's a difference between getting a $10 gift card every month for your services versus your client making you a handmade card every month. You'd be more willing to accept the card than the $10 gift card, just making sure that we're not setting the expectation that there's something that should be done to thank you for your services every single month. We as RBT should always be aware of that potential for a power dynamic. Moving on to section 2 here, responsibilities in providing behavior technician services. This is going to be protecting confidential information. So confidentiality is critical, and RBTs must protect all personal information about clients. This includes not discussing cases in public, securing records, and only sharing information with authorized individuals. So for example, here we have discussing a client's behavior in a crowded staff lounge could violate this code even without using those names. So again, using HIPAA compliant information, yes, obviously we should be doing that, but if you provide too much information, again, people can make their own assumptions. All right. Moving on to RBT's work under the discretion of a qualified supervisor. So we've said it a couple of times already, but RBTs are not independent practitioners. They have to work under the supervision of a BCBA or a BCABA who provides regular feedback and guidance. If you feel as though you are in a situation where you are making behavior analytic decisions, please reach out and we can make sure that we remedy this as quickly as possible. But for example, here we have an RBT implementing a major change to a behavior plan without supervisor approval is not allowed. So let's say you are running a DRO procedure and you decide that, well, the client could probably go 4 minutes instead of 3 minutes, so you just independently increase that interval. That is unethical, and we should not be doing that in any capacity. We should always make sure that we're following the behavior changes that are implemented by our supervisor and not taking that upon ourselves to make those decisions. All right. Next is RBT's work under the direction of a qualified supervisor. So RBTs are not independent. I think I just read that. Yep, I did. Sorry, my bad. Sorry. Moving on to the next code here is following the supervisor's instructions. So RBTs are expected to follow the protocols given by their supervisor unless those directions are unsafe or unethical. If you are unsure if instructions from your supervisor are unsafe or unethical, 1, you should consult your code, and 2, you should consult an appropriate supervisor. So if you don't feel as though you can confront this with your current supervisor and you're not sure who to escalate that to, reach out to me and we can figure that out for you. All right, last little section here is just seeking guidance when faced with ethical uncertainty. This goes back to our chain of command. So when RBTs are unsure of what to do in an ethical situation, they have to seek that support. This can include asking a supervisor or reviewing your ethics code or even consulting an ethical committee. But however, if we ignore a problem, this is unacceptable because it just creates the space for the problem to get worse and for the problem to grow. And then if one person is engaging in unethical behavior and models that unethical behavior without any kind of consequence or report, another person is going to then see that behavior and then model it, and then from there it just grows. So that's why we all have to keep each other accountable. Moving on to our last section here, section 3. So this is responsibilities to the BACB and the BACB required supervisor. We as RBTs have a responsibility to be familiar with our code. We have to know and understand the ethics code, and ignorance is not an excuse for breaking them. I know ignorance is an argument in a court of law. However, ignorance is not an argument for not knowing your ethical code. Next, we have our code 304 for reporting potential violations. So if an RBT witnesses unethical behavior such as abuse, falsified data, or boundary violations like a physical relationship or sexual relationship between like a supervisor and a supervisee, they have a duty to report that to their supervisor or an appropriate authority. So staying silent can allow harm to continue. This includes exploitation, abuse. It just compounds if you don't say anything. So an example would be if an RBT sees another technician being verbally aggressive with a client, they have to report that regardless of the situation. All right, so moving on here, in the event that you need to self-report, you have to do this within 30 days. Incidents where you have to self-report would be like legal charges, even a name change you have to self-report. Any kind of investigation, including payments or legal investigations that you're a part of or named in, you must report that. Any kind of suspension or termination from your professional organization has to be reported as well, because RBTs cannot independently practice. And then physical and mental conditions that hinder service delivery have to be reported as well. Now, I understand that reporting is very uncomfortable for some people, which is why we have whistleblower protections. RBTs are protected when they report violations in good faith. Retaliation is not permitted under the ethical code and under the BACB policies. However, if you do make false claims, this whistleblower protection will not save you, will not protect you. So making sure that when we are making those reports that they are coming from a place of good faith. All right. Now that we've made it through the basis of all of our information for our ethics training, we've got a couple of different scenarios that we're just going to facilitate a little group discussion on. So I'm going to read through this scenario here for you, and then I'm going to let you guys take a couple of minutes, maybe a minute or two, to look through the code, find a relevant code, and then let's discuss it and how it relates to this scenario. I would read the scenario out. I would then do that for each one. I would spend no more than like 3 to 5 minutes on each of these little scenarios just to ensure that we have enough time for the rest of our training and for our group activity. And then after the group discussion has been facilitated and all of that, within that group discussion also I would encourage them to relate those scenarios back to their personal sessions, relate those codes back to their sessions, just to ensure that they're really retaining the information. But after that is wrapped up and taken care of, we'll do conclusions and takeaways. So this is very obvious, but ethics is a daily practice, not just a guideline. So we should strive to adhere to our ethical codes and our ethical guidelines every single day when we're in session and around those that vulnerable population. Next, when in doubt, we should just consult our supervisor and refer to our ethics code. Again, if you're unsure who that supervisor is, let me know and we can go ahead and get that figured out. And then lastly, ethical RBTs promote better outcomes, respect, and professional integrity. So essentially, if one person does good, the next person will see that and model that behavior. We must set the example for each other. And that also includes when we see unethical behavior, reporting that, setting that example, because this is just going to promote respect and professional integrity for our overall science of ABA. All right, so next is the group activity. My plan for the group activity, depending on how many people are in the class, I will split them up into 2 to 3 people per group, and then once they're all split up, I'm going to go around and have them pick a letter between A and G. Each letter is going to correspond with one of the scenarios that are provided to us. I'm going to give them about 5 minutes to come up with their codes and to come up with a little presentation / discussion. Once they've come up with that, they'll all take turns going up and giving a brief 2 to 5 minute summary of their discussion and their scenario to the group, and essentially just discussing why they chose the codes that they chose. All right. Once everybody has gone through their scenarios, we'll host a brief discussion afterwards just to clarify things and just to answer any follow-up questions that people might have. We'll go through each of these questions that are bulleted here, like what made these scenarios challenging, what code is most interesting to you and why, and what is something new you learned today. And then the last one here, how will you ensure you follow the RBT ethics code daily and keep up to date with the updates to the codes. So we'll just facilitate a little bit of group discussion for maybe like 5 minutes on those. And then from there, I would redirect them to the post-training knowledge check. They would all complete the post-training knowledge check. Once they've completed that, I would then go and get their score from them, essentially record it, and then make sure that I redirect them back to the post-training survey, ensure that they fill that out. Once that they have that filled out, I'll then watch them convert their session, make any required time adjustments as needed, and then from there, I would dismiss them from the class. Let me know if there's anything that you would like for me to change and adjust to my training. If there's anything that you would like for me to add, I would be more than happy to make some adjustments. I have flashcards here to help keep me on track, but yeah, looking for about an hour for the training overall, including the pre and post test, the discussions, and the group activity. Okay, thank you.